book we have been reading in our syllabus and everything. So yes, he is from Britain. And I'll just give you a very short introduction. He calls himself just a writer, but there is a little bit of a formal introduction that I can give. So Zia Haider Rahman is a former anti-corruption lawyer, banker, and the author of the novel In the Light of What We Know, which won the Tait Black Memorial Prize, Britain's oldest literary award. Zia was educated in mathematics, economics, and law at Oxford, Cambridge, London, Munich, and Yale Universities, and is a Montgomery Fellow at Dartmouth College and is a Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Warwick University and the New American Foundation in Washington, D.C. Zia is currently working on 2 books of nonfiction, about which we will hear today. And with him in conversation is our dear Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, Professor Kaiser Haq, our resident poet, and we all know and love him, so I will hand over the mic to him to continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Zia is very methodical, being a mathematician. So when he agreed to come here, he sent a query to the head of the department. How would you like this event to be structured? And I remember reading it, but I forgot. I prefer to start without any preparation. Just go into it and then see how it goes. Let me begin by how my encounter was. I encountered the book first when it came out. I bought this first edition, and this is 2014. I went to England to attend a translation workshop at East Anglia. There's a British Center for Literary Translation, which is headquartered there. And every summer they have something.
Daniel Hahn.
I forget the name. And it was like this. There was a mock translator I met, and he invited me to lunch at his house. And we were talking about the book I was last time about the house. I said, my bet is sort of, I'm rooting for this novel. He said, it's not in the list. I said, that's shocking. And this is the second time it happened with the South Asian novel. The first time was with the becomes a suitable one. That was also not long listed. And it happened again. I said, it just didn't make any sense. And the translator's wife happened to be in publishing. An editor. And I said, she said, oh, my friend, so and so. She said, apparently this lady was your editor. She said, she'd be very happy to hear it, that you think that it should win hands down. Anyway, it then went on to win the oldest literary award in Britain, the James Tait Black Memorial Prize, which had also been won by D.S. Lawrence and others. So, and more importantly, it was received enthusiastically by critics worldwide. It's like Joyce Carol Oates, the New Yorker reviewer, James Wood. They sort of placed it in the absolutely the top league of novels. And it has been remained there, I'm happy to say. And after it was published, he was roped in, luckily, by the Dhaka Fest, and he came here. So that was a big event for, that was the highlight of that Lit Fest. And when he left, before that, we spent an evening together with Syed Manzoor Islam, who sadly passed away recently, and for 2000. Had a long chat, you know, and then I remember he said that he had 2 more novels planned out. And then, after he left, there was no contact. I knew that he was moving around in America. I heard a couple of broadcasts he made for Britain's BBC4. Somehow, you know, the internet is a wonderful creation. And it just, by chance, I sort of found those few talks, short 10-minute talks on various subjects. So I knew he was active, and once I think you wrote something for an op-ed for the Daily Star. And after last year's the 2024 movement, you had 1 op-ed.
Actually, yeah, I had 3 in September, October.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had seen and reading on this. So he has been active, and he has also maintained a connection with Bangladesh. Now, before that, Arifa has told you that he is from Bangladesh. He was born here. Now, if you look at his Wikipedia entry or his book, you will not find the year of birth. This is interesting. In the past, the writer's bio would always have born B, stop, this 1940 or something like that. Nowadays, no one mentions the year of birth. So, his family has moved from Sylhet to London, where he grew up. Went to a state school, won a scholarship to Oxford, and took a first class in mathematics. And after that, I mean, this is something that Arifa has mentioned, he went into law and studied in several places. So I ask you to disentangle those experiences, because there's Munich, Cambridge, Yale, and after that, you worked for Goldman Sachs, right? You were an investment banker.
With trade.
Also, a trade. 1 year was spent in Dhaka.
Yes.
Working for the TIB. And after 9/11,
That was after.
you went to Afghanistan as well.
Yeah.
And all this has been transformed into quote-unquote fictional writing in this book, you see. And alongside all this, there's a personal story here. It's an exciting book to read. It's also a painful book to read because of the emotional turmoil, which is palpable. But even in the text, it's repressed. It's not, but it's repressed, but you can feel it. You see. So now, what I've been saying all this, you must be wondering, so is it autobiographical? Now that's an irrelevant question. But I do feel, I mean, our basic training in literary studies is based on new criticism, which separates the work from the writer. But increasingly, I feel, and others too, and Harold Bloom and others, they've also said, that there is an absolute ontological distinction between the writer and the work. But it's the writer who has written that. And the more you know about the writer, you'll find something that will help you, understand the work better. So I'm all for a very immersive kind of approach, where biography and history, background, all these things are looked at and then related to the text. So with that,
he's providing his justification for asking personal questions.
So now you can respond any way you like.
Right. Thank you. That's a quite faithful account of the terrain that it covers. First of all, I want to thank ULAB and you and Arifa for inviting me. I was delighted when you suggested it and said yes straight away. Let's go backwards. There is an enormous amount of autobiography, but probably even more fiction. The autobiography is transmogrified. Naipaul talked about all fiction being experience completely transformed. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing, by the way, but it is experience completely transformed. So there is a connection that with autobiography in all instances, and in the novel actually, it's a strange novel. At one point, Zafar, one of the two lead characters, not the narrator, unnamed narrator, there's Zafar. Zafar makes the observation when he's asked about this question of autobiography and fiction. He says that Orhan Pamuk did not write a book about Trinidadian, South Asian migrant in Britain, in England. V.S. Naipaul didn't write a book about New Jersey Jews in the second half of the 20th century. And Philip Roth did not write about a book about middle-class Turks in Istanbul. So in a sense, when we ask, is a book autobiographical, we forget that actually, even before you get to that, you can see that all fiction is constrained by personal experience already. I used to answer the question, which I was directly asked, is this autobiographical, or how autobiographical is this? I used to say, with a straight face, I'd say 37%. And I wouldn't smile, I would just say that, and there would be a little bit of discomfort, and then a moment of, what does it, is he serious? Is he going, hang on, he's joking. And they would, this, and eventually I'd say, look, I don't know how much is autobiography. There are scenes that I've drawn on, there are things that I've drawn on that happened in a very different way, and then some of them happened to me, some of them happened to me. But novelists plunder experience in a way. It's a dirty little secret, which is not even a secret, that we are constantly mining reality and our experience for everything fictional. A lot of my dialogue is inspired by things I've heard. And I pay very close attention to dialogue. In fact, this novel is a frame story in which two people are talking to each other. So in a sense, all of it is dialogue. And so you're constantly mining experience. The other thing I would say, there are two things I would say. One is, I sound like I'm evading the question. I always sound like I'm evading the question because I think everybody expects to say, yeah, a lot of it is, this is what happens, or this is, very much drawn on my life. Well, yes and no. At the literary festival, someone asked this question, and I said to them, and they prefaced it by saying, look, I see your bio in the back, and it's so much of it is similar to the biography of Zafar. And then I'd say to them, actually, all you've done is you've seen a similarity between one description and another. You have to ask yourself what I left out of the second description. If I gave you a much richer description of Zia Haider Rahman, you might not actually, you might come to the conclusion this novel is not autobiographical. And so, and in fact it was deliberate that in my biography I would focus on things that relate to the novel, because that's how novels are sold these days. Fictional work is very much tied to the person. In the West, it's the author sells the book as well, right? To the extent that it is absolutely the case, some authors, because they're good looking, they will get book contracts. This is not a controversial point. I know one very successful author who wrote, when she was trying to get agents, she wrote a letter to the agents saying, describing herself, including a photograph saying you're photogenic. The other point I'd make, and this is the most interesting point I could make, I don't know how interesting it is, but this is the most interesting point, and then I'll move on, is that when people ask me about specific scenes, and they ask me, is that autobiographical, they never ask me about scenes that actually are autobiographical. They always ask me about scenes, and I'll actually read one if I do any reading, I'll read one. They ask me about scenes which, on reflection, it became quickly apparent to me, were scenes where I had taken something autobiographical and changed it deeply, but not factually. What I mean is, come to a scene where there are two, there's Zafar and another boy. He's also the same age as Zafar, about 10 or 12. And the other boy dies in a train crash. And that scene, people have asked me over and over again, is that autobiographical? It's not, but it comes from an even more intimate place than autobiography. And that is, it is a representation of something that I have felt my whole life, which is that I'm very lucky. That there is another Zia who is not so lucky. And he's the Zia who stayed in Bangladesh, who stayed in Sylhet, who stayed in the village, who had this talent, was a gifted child, but had nowhere to nurture it. That nothing, there was no schooling, nothing to capture his talent and develop it. And I have felt that my whole life, that it was on the turn of a dime that I landed up in a place where, even though I didn't actually even go to school as much as other kids, I used to bunk schools there. I was playing truant to go to the library. But there was a library. It was a great library. And so that scene came from a much more intimate place of very personal conflict than even by autobiography. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's those scenes that people ask me about. Always, they say. And so I realized that actually, it's funny, you put something very special into scenes if they are rooted in, or if they derive from, the very grubby materials of your psyche, rather than the prosaic stuff of your CV or your diary, not that stuff. That stuff is actually not, it's not powerful. It doesn't have something inside that makes it flash. Anyway, is that interesting at all? Yes. Oh, another thing, by the way. I have to say, I was surprised initially that I wasn't shortlisted for the book. It was a surprise, but then subsequent things, and I came to understand that the book really wasn't. Oh, sorry. I came to understand that the book, other people told me actually, no, they couldn't have shortlisted for the book. And then eventually when it won the James Tait Prize, it's sort of, that's when I said, which was a year later, it was the James Tait Prize, a very different kind of prize. It's awarded by, it's a different kind of prize. It's awarded by academic readers, the university, graduate students and the faculty in Edinburgh University, which is where the oldest English literature department in the world is, and they decide. And it's a very different kind of prize. So the people who have won it in the past famously have won it before they became famous. But they're all people like D.H. Lawrence, Evelyn Ward, Graham Greene, astonishing list of names, except they won it before they became famous. And so there was this, they had it was that kind of book. And it was a challenge book. It wasn't, it is a challenge book. It's not people say it's not a difficult book to read, but it is a challenge book. It is an uncomfortable book. In many places it's very uncomfortable. And its politics is very uncomfortable. It's two men talking to each other, one of whom is very sexist, and the other one, it's not clear how sexist he is. And there's an irony in that, because later on something horrific happens. So I think its politics make, and it's also highly critical of the West, extremely critical of American foreign policy, British foreign policy, and of the NGO culture. When it came out, it's a very fascinating, for me, I didn't think for everybody else, but how it was received. It was reviewed almost everywhere, except, weirdly, it wasn't reviewed in The Economist and in the Financial Times. And there's a big story about the global financial crisis. And yet every other financial organ reviewed the book. The finance people were talking about the book a heck of a lot. And the development people were talking about it. William Easterly said the best novel of 2014 is also the best development novel of 2014. So they didn't review it. I mean, it's puzzling. Why would it be? Because it's kind of, it's easy for them to review. And in fact, at the end of the year, when they asked readers to write in, they put in 2 readers' comments about my book, and all the other books just had 1 reader's comment, because there was clearly readers had read it, and there must have been some kind of, why didn't they become Financial Times? And there is a story there. It's a story about how small Britain is, and how connected the elite are, and the connections between institutions. Because the other thing is, you asked me if it's autobiography. Well, there are characters in this novel that are drawn from real life. It's now 11 years. Ashraf Ghani is in this novel, prominently, and it is Ashraf Ghani, and everybody recognizes it's Ashraf Ghani. And in 2014, Ashraf Ghani was in a dispute with Ahmed Ahmadullah. And in the summer, after this novel came out, a dispute over the results of that election. They were negotiating who would be president, power sharing. And this book was kind of really awkward, really awkward, because it paints it in a very poor light. It paints it in the light that is now quite obviously the appropriate light. As someone who is aloof, doesn't really, there's a line in the novel that says he is from that breed of international development person, expert, that is unsparing in its love for all humanity, but has no interest in people. We recognize such people, right?
Yeah. So, even Kamal is
yeah, that's right. Even Kamal is mentioned, and I mean, nobody really survives scrutiny, and that's probably true of me as well, right? I mean, not probably. I know I don't. None of us really want to be looked at too closely. So, but that is the job of the writer. The job of the writer is to notice. It really is to notice. And if anybody cares about, if anyone wants to write, any kind of writing, cultivate an attitude of noticing. When the novel came out, friends of friends who had met me at dinner parties used to say, "That Zia wrote this book, but he was always so quiet at dinner parties. He was always just sitting there, listening and watching, and that's because I'm just paying attention to what's going on. Endlessly fascinating. People are endlessly fascinating."
when you go to Afghanistan, that section is, I think for the reader, the most difficult to read. Because the details are not familiar, and it's also a thriller.
Yeah, it is a thriller.
And
an American diplomat described it to me. He said he read the scene with Zafar and a Pakistani colonel, a Pakistani ISI officer, and a third person, a nuclear physicist. He said the characters spoke exactly like Pakistani elite ladies. I recognize that. It's a thriller, yeah. And I mentioned that the character, the scene for those characters to confirm. Yeah, I mean that's spy stuff, right? ISI, nuclear physicist.
we'll have a reading of a section that he has chosen. But before that, come in and ask you about something else. The style. I mean, broadly, it is a part of post-colonial.
Yeah, broadly, yeah, of course.
And
it takes, it quotes an epigraph from Edward Said.
Yeah.
As the first epigraph.
And it is not only in post-colonial literature, but in modernist literature as a whole. You have, on the one hand, those who have mastered a plain style, Hemingway, Orwell, okay? At the other extreme, you have an artificial language like that of James Joyce.
Yeah.
And allied to that kind of writing, you have, say, Rushdie's Chatnification, the idiom of all about which happened, that kind of thing. So, linguistic experimentation of various sorts. And you have the plain style, and then in between, you can have all kinds of, variations. Most post-colonial writers, I think, try to have a kind of post-colonial flavor, in the idiom, in the language they use. You have written in Dhaka English. You see, that stands out. And at times I thought, yeah, evening war, very English writers. So, could you tell us how you created this style and how you came upon it, how you got to write in this style?
It's a really good question, and it's a really good question, and it's a really important topic and question. There's a chapter in this book called Henna Tattoo, and in the chapter, most of the chapter titles don't really mean anything. Well, they don't. They're just some phrase in the chapter that jumps out at you. Yeah, or there's a joke. That chapter is actually called Henna Tattoo or redundancies or superfluities or something like that. And that is itself is a joke. Redundancy or superfluity. So one of those words is already a redundancy. Redundant or superfluous. That's it. Why is it an important question? And what is the meaning of Henna Tattoo? In that book, there's a moment when the narrator is urging Zafar to write a book. And Zafar, that sounds cute, a story within a book, and guys, it actually works. If you get the reader embedded in the text, you can do certain things that otherwise, if I'm talking about it, sounds cute, why would you get it? It's cute and implausible. But actually, by that point, when this happens, the reader is very much embedded in the text because there is something substantive going on. And so this is actually just a digression. And the narrator is trying to get Zafar to stay because he thinks that he's going to leave. So Zafar has appeared on his doorstep, and there's always this imminent threat that Zafar might leave. And he's trying to get, he says, look, there's a flat at the top of the house. Just stay there, take as long as you need, why don't you write? And all this stuff you're telling me is just astonishing. Just sit down and write, and I'm sure I remember. And in that conversation, it comes to the point where the Zafar, the narrator, Pakistani elite, British, American actually, he has many passports, he says, well, you can write a book about Bangladesh. And Zafar, at that moment he starts ridiculing all these books about South Asia or set in South Asia that are written for a Western audience. And he quotes, I think he even quotes, or if he doesn't, it's an epigraph, or it's not an epigraph, I am thinking about something Naipaul said. He said that English literature from India is the first of its kind in the history of the world, because it is a literature written about one people in the language of another people for an audience that is somewhere else. And Henna Tattoo, in the chapter Zafar talks about henna tattoo, I write about henna tattoos and sari borders, and how there are so many of these books, the covers of which include a silhouette of a minaret, or a henna tattoo, or a sari border, and you just know these are Orientalist books, just from their cover. And I will judge that kind of book by that kind of cover. There's so much to sell to a Western audience. So my book covers, even when actually my favorite book cover is the Dutch book cover. It's amazing. But all the book covers are great. None of them are Orientalist. I think my agent made sure of that. I didn't have to say anything. I think my agent made sure of that. I think my agent said, make sure before to the cover artist, make sure you read chapter X before you decide on the cover, because authors don't have much control over the covers. So what I'm saying is, the style is mine. I grew up in the West. I read canonical fiction. I read at the library. I did not have parents or teachers who could tell me what to read. So I just read Penguin Modern Classics and Penguin Classics. Because I couldn't, there was no other way to tell what is a great book and what isn't. And that's where my writing is. I also am allergic to this pandering. I find it highly offensive. I see it in so much of English writing in Bangladesh, in India, Pakistan. It's a disease. Things are getting better. There are more and more, there are better and better writers. But you're writing for a Western audience. The text loses authenticity, you can't trust it. The author is not in communion with the reader. The author is either flattering the reader or sensitive to the reader. These sorts of, that's the stance. Whereas you really want to achieve communion. And that doesn't mean it's a problem if they don't know certain things, don't know others. You want to explain what a word is, don't do it in any way explicitly. If you really must work hard at finding a way in which the meaning, or what enough of the meaning, is apparent through other things in the text. And don't worry if it's not an important thing, and then it will remain unimportant. It won't have an impact. So you can say dal. They don't know what dal is. Of course, now everybody knows what dal is, but it doesn't matter as well. And yet, so many writers take on this, the stance of being the reporter. That's not art. You're not reporting. The stance of being, what's her name? Gayatri Spivak's famous phrase. This buffer class of native performance, bubbles. You aren't really just a bubble if you start doing that. You're not just a bubble in terms of you're portraying art. You really just try to make something beautiful that stands on its own. So you're not about explaining, it's about showing. In writing dictum, we talk a lot about not explaining but showing. And it's hard. Sometimes, for instance, with Zafar, when he's talking, and you see it in TV as well, sometimes they need to explain something. So take, for instance, does everybody know The West Wing by Aaron Sorkin? It's a big drama in the US, very popular. Also had a huge influence on the shape of TV drama in the US. Very rich in dialogue, extremely rich in dialogue. It's set in the West Wing of the White House, and it's about the staff and the president. And it's a fantastic drama. And it's all dialogue. Now, Aaron Sorkin has admitted freely that he doesn't really know how to write plot, but he does know how to write dialogue. And he takes his plots, very thin plots, from political biographies. But often something needs to be explained about the political process, right? Because it's in that setting, and audiences won't know. And he does a lot of work, I have to say, often failing. Does a lot of work to try to bring that explanation across without it sounding forced. Because the problem is, people in the White House don't need explanations. You don't need to give an explanation of how a department or committee meeting works to another person in the department. But if you're writing a drama about this, you will have to, the reader won't understand how the departmental meeting goes and the politics. So there's a kind of job of explanation that needs to be done for the audience or the reader, depending on the medium. So that, too much of that I've seen in South Asian literature. We know that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything controversial. Sorry.
On this, extend this theme.
Rushdie, by the way, Rushdie is in torment about it, going back. Now he's not. In Midnight's Children, you can see he's constantly fighting with this. There are passages where he says, I'll just use this and fuck it, it doesn't matter, I know that people won't know. But then at other times you can see, I have to explain something, otherwise it doesn't work, you know. But he does a lot of work. And by that I mean, he makes the explanation, he embeds it in something that is necessary. So it's a very important idea in literature. Things have to be necessary. That's the, what is happening has to be necessary within the frame of the story. And as soon as you have something that's not necessary, you sort of, you lose something, because they'll see, and an explanation, just standing up, that is never necessary. It doesn't happen in the story arc. There's no necessity. It's not necessary for two people in a department to explain, and that necessity is all, is there all the time. My editor actually talks about it. It's funny, I used to call it justification, and he called it necessity. Now I call it necessity.
It is a universal problem for writers.
Yeah.
But for third-world writers, post-colonial writers, you have
exactly. This is universal. You write a novel about an operating theatre, or a short story in which the drama is. I'm just thinking of this, but the drama is this person going to survive this operation? And then you realize as the story unfolds, there is a relationship of some kind between the surgeon and a nurse and another surgeon. And then as the story unfolds, you begin to wonder, actually, is the patient related to, I'm just making this up. But all the time, they're using language that we don't know, and we don't know what the procedure is for. So that stuff has to be explained. But you can decide, no, I'm not going to explain it, because from a dramatic perspective, what matters is elsewhere. You understand what I'm saying? So that's an interesting idea for a story, actually, isn't it? A little drama about just one operation. Yeah. Someone should write that.
The question of medium. Interestingly, from Naipaul, it seems that Naipaul, the role of Alken Narayan in shaping Naipaul's character is something that usually the critics don't mention.
Yeah. I read a lot of Alken Narayan.
But when Naipaul started writing, and when he came upon, when he discovered Alken Narayan, he realized, and he actually in his obituary on Alken Narayan, he quotes a few lines, and he mentions these things. That what he found in Alken Narayan is that here is somebody educated in a colonial system who wants to write about India. And what he did is totally shrugged off the entire literary tradition of English literature, as if it didn't exist. And he set about inventing the English language, as it were. Imagine that you are inventing the language. And that is why his writing is so plain. And interestingly, he doesn't use any Indian words. There's only one Indian word that I found in his writings. And for a long time I didn't know what it meant. But with the coming of the internet, I could see what it meant. P-Y-O-L, peon. A peon is like a little space in front of the house, the steps going up and on the side, little terrace-like thing.
Sort of like a porch.
A very small porch-like thing where people would sit. So he uses that word. But other than that, no. You don't know what language they're talking in. And the dialogue also works beautifully. It's just plain, normal English. And I think Naipaul learned that from Alken Narayan. And now to sort of go over to the larger questions of literary politics, publishing, policy politics, and for long, a South Asian writer, let's say, writing in English, really acquired caste status, high caste status, when a Western publisher accepted. So you have writers published only in South Asia, and you have writers who are also published internationally. And that is the sort of the grounding. And over there, a lot of politics comes in, which I've heard from people engaged in publishing in the West. So you are a Muslim from Bangladesh who are writing a novel, have a fundamentalist, Islamic extremist, you know. So this kind of pressure, this is one thing. And then there are a lot of transnational writers nowadays. So you settle in another sense. And there the cultural establishment promotes multiculturalism. So you must promote some of the immigrant writers. So in America, for example, Bharati Mukherjee was the star for a long time. Now nobody reads her. Then they picked up Jubal Ayuri. So these are these stars who were sort of picked up and projected as shiny examples of what multiculturalism can create. Another phenomenon is that you have a sort of niche for the immigrant writer. In Germany, they have a term called Arbeitsliteratur. The literature produced by people who have come to Germany to work and then they settle down. So Arbeitsliteratur is considered as a separate category. And when the reviewers and critics handle them with kid gloves, sort of patronizing there's a pattern on the back, that kind of thing. So these are aspects of global Western culture. And then you have a country like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. I think you said that things are changing slowly. So I think now probably most Indian writers have the most readers in India. Yes. In the past it wasn't like that. So there's a local readership which can sustain the literary industry. This is slowly growing, I think.
This is slowly growing?
Don't you think?
Yes. So there's a homogenizing, not of content, but of not homogenizing. This word. I think it's. Well, first of all, there are more English reading Indians, and that is making a huge difference. The fact that there are these literary prizes now in English, in English writing, I forget what they're called, but they're there, and they grab the headlines, certainly in India. Oh yeah, sorry, they grab the headlines, certainly in India. The fact that so that's changing things. The story about fiction in the West, especially the Anglophone West, it's very clear. The data is very clear. It's on its way out. It's something. It's very uncomfortable to talk about. It's very uncomfortable to talk about in an English department. But it's also actually what is talked about in the English department, certainly in the West, a lot now. Because English departments are shutting down as well. It's part of this trend that enrollments in humanities generally and English departments has just plummeted in the last 15 years. So you can sort of Google about this, you'll see that. And a number of departments have shut down. You mentioned UEA. UEA has, in the last few years, shut down various of its humanities departments. And that's a very distinguished humanities school as well as STEM. And it's being driven not by, well, it's being driven by enrollments. So it's not because governments aren't giving enough money, it's because students aren't enrolling in these subjects. It's quite disturbing. And this is related also to the decline. I don't know how causally, but this is related to the decline in literary fiction. In 2017, the Arts Council of England, which by its name you understand has an interest in this topic, published a report announcing that the literary fiction is in crisis. This was in 2017, and what we've seen is just a drop in sales year upon year. And then during COVID, there was an uptick, but then it returned to the trend after COVID. And there's a question about why this is. If one stays within, if one were just looking at it in terms of product and literature, I think one wouldn't find an answer. You have to understand that reading novels is just one of the ways we spend time. And so the commodity is not the book. The commodity at the point of consumer's decision are the alternative ways of spending time. And now we know, all the research shows that a lot of people spend time on their phones, scrolling through reels and videos. And this is just very, very common content is what people look at and want. And this has had devastating effects on books. Book sales just gone down. Some genre fiction is doing well, like fantasy, romance. That's always been the case, they have their own market. But literary fiction, which is the genre, which is this sort of book, or a book that Philip Roth would write, or a book that Nadine Alderman might write. These are those kinds of books are just the sales are just plummeting. So Philip Roth argued that in about 30, 40 years, literary fiction will have the same status as Latin poetry. You will find 100,000 people in the US, 50,000 in the UK who still read Latin poetry. There's a small community that creates it. But there's really, it just doesn't have the numbers. I didn't know how poorly paid fiction was. Sorry, again. I didn't know how poorly paid fiction was. I was very lucky I got this fantastic literary agent without any effort. But if someone had told me beforehand, there was an accident, I say without any effort, not because I wrote it. I didn't even, it was sent by someone else, the chapter was sent by someone else without my permission to the literary agent. So that's how and then the phone started ringing in the morning at 6 in the morning. So that's how I came to knowledge. But if someone had said to me, you've got to work hard to get an agent, and by the way, you will earn more money if you just spend the same amount of time teaching in a primary school. If someone had said that to me, I wouldn't have bothered. Because I'm not interested in prestige. I've been writing since adolescence. I'm not driven by prestige, especially in the eyes of people I don't really respect very much, because they are from a class that's so different from mine. Did you understand me? But I had a conversation with a French novelist called Edouard Louis, who wrote a bestseller called The End of Any, and he comes from a very working class background, and he wrote a memoir fiction again, but his was much closer to him, but it was fiction. And he's also a Montgomery Fellow at Dartmouth, and so am I. And then from time to time, the administration, Dartmouth, called us up and offered this or that. They wanted us to have a conversation. This was during COVID, so we were online. And we were invited to speak for an hour for a fee, so that they would let them broadcast this, to create content. Edward and I spoke for 5 hours. Dartmouth still don't know what to do with this 5 hour long. So I said, okay, well, when my 2 non-fiction books come out, that would be a good time to publish it in a series. And one of the questions I asked Edward in this conversation was, and I asked him a very mischievous question, how do you feel about writing books for these people? And Edward looked at me and he smiled and he knew exactly what I meant. Because we're both from very working class backgrounds, and it is part of this, because the class thing is very similar to writing for another audience. It feels very much like that, which is why I'm particularly allergic to South Asians writing for a Western audience, changing the language, because you see that in class. And for me, if I write about anything, everything I see through the lens of class, because I am alert to how much social hierarchies regulate and shape everything we do. Here, it's very obvious, right? But I'm very alive to that. I'm very alive not just to that, but how one class just is blind to certain things, and how that presents in social relationship is fascinating. But then if you start writing it, how do you do it in a way that you don't, are you telling the elite, are you educating the elite? What kind of art is that? What is are you educating the white man with, if you're I mean, I want to make art. And I do not want to be so close to that kind of reader. I said something at North-South University, which is that I really want good readers. And it was a controversial. People came up to me and asked me,
how do you feel about the tokenism and the patronizing?
Yeah, there is some of that, but the tokenism, I don't feel. I think it does harm, because the tokenism is always it's the photogenic, the short book. It's this the tokenism is very transparent tokenism. I don't mind it, because ultimately, here's the thing: it's terrible. Books don't matter. Fiction doesn't have a prominent place in culture. It doesn't have an impact beyond the literary pages. Not anymore. It did, but we have to go back a while. But now it doesn't. So tokenism, but tokenism in other areas will make a difference. Like tokenism in TV, on Netflix shows, that makes a difference. And there you can either call it tokenism, or you can say, actually, wouldn't it be great if, just interesting if we had a drama that's set ostensibly in some kind of Victorian Britain, or even earlier, Tudor Britain. That's not happening yet. But an earlier Britain, where the actors actually can be an ancient race, right? And there is a show. I haven't actually seen the show. But there's a show like based on this principle of frilly collars, but there are some actors who are black, some I think are Chinese in appearance, and I'm not sure that is tokenism. So there's tokenism, there's DEI as they call it, that's what you're referring to, things like that. But it's not always that, because a lot of the writers are interested in interplay. And it is true, you can have dramas where every character is white, But because our world cares, our world is sensitive to race, our world is sensitive to gender, our world is sensitive to class. If you bring in another character who doesn't fit those the dominant categories, you can get interesting things happening.
Yeah.
So there's an objective justification for doing that as well, right?
So Star Wars is a good example.
Yeah, so this is a great
Or
example.
Friends.
Yeah. I mean, when did Friends do that? Sorry.
So yeah, they brought in a black character just for the sake of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, that's for the sake, that's an example of the,
Right.
yeah, no, exactly, that's when it's tokenism. That's when actually, that's when the writers don't have, or the director, that's when they don't have any authentic interest in seeing what this brings. That's tokenism. But if you do, and you are, and of course, those are not at all, they're not about life. I'm not saying true to life, they're just not, they're universes of their own. Star Wars, obviously, but Friends too. Nobody has friends. I lived in Europe, nobody has friendships like that. That's not a thing. This is a stylization that it's a fantasy, it's a universe of its own. Yeah?
Before we go on to the reading,
sorry.
a couple something that mentioned. The role of writing schools.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that I found out is that one of our former students then became a young colleague. She's now doing a PhD in reading writing in America. And she said me something, and I commented, why do you have so many local words, Bangladeshi words, or South Asian words? And she said, my teacher said I should use even more. I said, look, I mean, if the English language is capable of dealing with what you are writing about, why unnecessarily have a Bangla word, it'll not true. But it seems that the school is deliberately creating a ghetto of writers, where they'll just write in this kind of hybrid idiom, and those words will be read by a particular audience. So, or analyzed in the classroom, in a particular way. It has no organic, connection with culture. So that's another. I mean, the way that schools are operating now, I think, needs to be examined.
It's funny. While English departments are closing, it's astonishing. Creative writing is going up. Creative writing, creative writing, the teaching of creative writing is flourishing. And it's not just in formal universities, but there are other, you scroll through Facebook and see that authors are offering writing lessons, we've got together with other authors, some of them workshops, and there are all kinds of learning opportunities for creative writing. So there's a huge appetite to write, because what seems to have been tapped into is this fantasy that so many people have, not of writing, but fantasy of having a book. All writers get messages from people who describe themselves as aspiring writers and are seeking advice. And the obvious first question that I and many writers ask is, are you writing? And it throws people. And you hear, yes, and so that's the only advice. And then they say, how do I get an agent? And I said, well, look at the internet, there's so much there. But you have to have something to show. And if it's good, you have to fight for that. And if you really want it. But they want so many fail on the, because I ask, I say, how many words are you writing? Some of them aren't able to say, they start. And then I realize, you don't even know what your word count is. If you write every day, you very quickly get it, because if you're using any word processor at the bottom, it gives you the word count. Your eye just noticing that. Piece of A4, double-sided, 12 points, Times New Roman. That's 250 words. You just know it. So I know this person doesn't write every day. And you've got to want to do it. You've got to want. There is no way you will write a 200,000 word, whatever that is, 550-page novel if you don't have, if you're not motivated by the process. And yet, all these creative writing, all this provision of creative writing education, it's absolutely shocking. And all of it is it's exploiting people's fantasies. None of these people, so few go on to write the book. And so many of these people who are paying for these writing lessons are middle-aged people whose children have left behind, and they have the money, and they have, and they're trying to find something, but then, are you actually writing? So why do you want to be a writer? That's the thing. They want to be. There are MFA programs in the US now, that are long established by Columbia and others, where the graduates are coming out and now saying this was a waste of degree because they can't get any work. Nobody, because when they do get a work contract, it's tiny amounts of money. It's a very negative talk, but one of the things that we have to confront is that the economy of literary fiction is changing. We are at a point where it's changing sharply. English departments will not look like what they look like now. So I'm writing 2 books. I was going to write 4 books. I sent publishers 4 book proposals, and then right afterwards, what I'm doing is stupid. And I said to my engineer, withdraw and say that the other 2 were not doing, because by the time I finish these 2, I might not want to do the other 2. So. And the other 2, just one of them was called Saving Humanities. Not Saving Humanity, but Saving Humanities. And I've been tracking the decline of the humanities for the last 10 years, and tracking how humanities departments have been responding to that. And it's nonsense. They don't know how to respond. They keep trying to tell students these justifications and articles in newspapers that humanities will prepare you for this, that, and the other in the world of work. Well, if that's the case, why aren't students enrolling? Why do they need to be told this? Instead, people don't have to go and explain that you will get a job if you do biochemistry. Why don't employers recognize all this? Why? And my argument is that the virtue of the humanities is very little to do with the world of work. The virtue of the humanities is that we need most people, we don't need everybody, we need a good number of people in our society with an appreciation of the humanities, because life is more than economics.
Sorry, really. Yeah.
You want me to sorry.
Yeah. Like you to
I'm going to do life is more than economics. And that argument hasn't been made. But it can't sustain. So how do we make humanities sustainable, knowing that the benefit that I get from the humanities is not something that's going to get me enough money to make a living, but my being present in the world and using that humanities benefits everyone around me, and benefits society as a whole. In other words, it's a public good, right? There's no public good. It's like the street lamp. Nobody pays for the street lamp in front of their house, it benefits them. But it benefits other people as well. And that's why the state steps in and pays for the street lamp. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's how we have to think about humanities, that it is a public good. It's not, and in fact everything that you see, these defenses of the humanities, well, they're actually making it worse, because they are trying to justify it on the same footing as the capitalist critics. They're saying, no, you will get a great job with the humanities. All right. So I'm going to read a section. This is an interesting section, because this is, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. He has, I mentioned this train crash. Well, what happened was he got off the train because the train had come to a stop before a river, and the driver had got out. It's train to select, and the driver had got out, and had done so because there was some suggestion that this bridge wasn't safe. So the driver had walked across the bridge, testing it, looking at it. There were some girders missing. Zafar gets off the train, and he crosses the bridge to there's a little village on the other side, and kerosene lanterns, it's late at night. Presently, the train starts moving slowly across the bridge, and the bridge gives way, and the train crashes into the river, pulling all the carriages into the river, and so Zafar witnesses all this. And then he starts walking after he tries to help and realizes there's nothing he can do. There are people in the villages on the sides of the bridge helping, and he was a small boy and he was getting in the way. So he starts walking on the train track. I started walking along the railway track towards Kulabara station, where I was supposed to meet my uncle, my father's brother. I did, of course, look for the rumoured telephone, but when I found it, a man was busy trying to get through to Select City to inform the authorities of the disaster, and my own needs seemed to be petty now. My bag was gone, of course. I had nothing other than a wad of cash in my pocket, a penknife, passport, notebook, and a pencil. I pushed what I had seen out of my mind because it was so big, and I did not know how to think about it. The pure night was rolling in, and though it would not be cold, I knew that I would be afraid of the dark. The clouds had now dispersed, revealing the blue night that kept the stars apart. There were so many stars. City dwellers see this rarely, on vacations when their senses are addled by many new things at once. They cannot dream of the clear darkness, how the stars emerge only when everything else in the world is held at bay. I remember it all so well, but I also know that I cannot recall the memory with the character of perception I had then, the way we see things as children. I saw the moon in its near fullness and understood that though we call it moonlight, it is after all only sunlight, and that we're always living in the glare of one star, reflected or not. Don't they say that even the oil in the ground is just the compressed image of the sun? Two people can see the same thing differently, that is obvious. But the notion that the same person can see the same thing utterly differently, something about it unsettles, leaving a vacancy between me and those days, like an empty chair between two people. An hour or so later, I came to a level crossing, a patch of crumbling tarmac. In the distance, on a ribbon of mauve hemming a hill against the edge of the sky, I saw a light moving at the pace of a star. It grew brighter before dividing in two. The car was a white Land Rover, which I would learn was in the service of the UN, much like the land cruisers and Pajero so ubiquitous among aid organizations in the third world today. As it drew near, I waved it down, and after explaining my predicament to the driver and offering to pay him something, I jumped in. He'd take me to the village, which involved a considerable detour, he explained, and his employers would not be happy if they knew. I understood what he was saying. It was a terrible ride, the roads entirely unsuitable for cars, made worse by the rains. The driver dropped me off about a mile from the village. There were pineapples growing in the wild among bamboo and shrubs in what I first thought were areas of darkness, or what I would discover in time were patches of soil, often in elevated mounds, thereby draining well, that received shafts of light at the time of day when the sun was high. They were red, these pineapples, with traces of the yellow and the green you know of pineapples, but much more of an ochre red, blossoms of rust. And they were not the monstrous things you find in supermarkets here, but small, scarcely bigger than an orange, all the better for sneaking into the small places where the light may get to the earth. When I think of those pineapples now, I always think of a hand grenade. It is an image seen somewhere, almost certainly later, an image written over memories already laid down. I remember so much. There is a woman squatting at a fire, her sari pulled around her, and she is blowing through a piece of bamboo into the base of the fire. There was less oxygen in her breath, it occurs to me now, than in the air around her, since it was exhaled breath, but it was flowing fast through the length of the bamboo, so the flames grew greater. The hillock at the end of the field belonged, as I would learn, to the family. But it was where, with my grandfather's blessing, the local Hindus would bring their cows to die, in a part of the world where historically varieties of religious practices, not just Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam, but varieties within each, carried on side by side. In fact, many intermingled to form syncretic faiths, which is even apparent today in the practices of Muslim celebrities in London. On emerging from the forest of bamboo then, I saw to my left the field and hillock, as I said. To my right was the hamlet. My body sensed imminent relief, and I could feel the sinews of my legs begin to yield to their tiredness. I approached the cluster of mud huts and shacks that comprised the family homestead, my grandfather's and his sons. Perhaps it was a kind of something from infancy came down to me, not a memory, but an echo heard many years later. The moonlight threw a blue-white powder over the area, and I saw the moon itself glancing off the taut skin of the pond, bursting on the leaves of the coconut trees, transfiguring them into torches of velvet green. From time to time, I could hear the somersaults of fishes in the pond, while all around, from everywhere and nowhere, came the croon of crickets, geckos, and tree frogs, fused into a purring song. A memory inside me was trying to wrestle its way through to consciousness, but to know that you once saw the same things, a landscape, a hamlet, and a house, in an altogether different way from how you see them now, and to know this without being able to recall the former memory itself can cause a disembodied sensation. I saw then a form on the veranda of the main house, sitting on the step. I could make out a dash of long black hair, iridescent in the darkness, and the drape of a white sari over the bent form. The woman's head was nestled in her crossed arms, which braced her hunched up knees. She has not seen me, I thought. I stood there, taking in the gifts of my senses. Crickets plucking the air, the forest rising behind the huts, the treetops knitting into the blue fabric of the night, one moon shimmering in the sky and another floating on the surface of the pond. I picked up a loose stone and tossed it into the pond to watch the water strike up in a vibrating luminosity, a remarkable geometric precision. The woman was now standing a few steps off the veranda, the whites of her eyes catching the light, her hair shining. I tried to imagine how I must have looked to her, but I was so tired. All I could see was my body crumpling. We both walked, and when we met, we stood for a moment, each regarding the other. She was in her mid-20s in those days, slender and beautiful, and I do not think I will ever forget the tenderness in her eyes. She lifted her hand to cup my cheek, and then curled it around the back of my head and pulled me into her breast, holding me tighter. My body gave way, and the exhaustion from the day folded over me. This is how I began the next 4 years of my life in a village in the northeast corner of Bangladesh. They were the happiest years of my life, but they began with tears. This is where he meets his mother.
Did you actually spend some time
Yeah, I did.
in a
Incident? Yeah, I did.
You came back and...
Yeah, I did. I came back when I was about 10, and I spent a year. Yeah, I did. I spent an amazing year. Yeah, it was very important year. It was very, very important. I didn't go to school, but I was, there was so much to see. There was so much to, it was so different from the concrete jungle of London, and I loved it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there was so much to see. Yeah. So, should we open up to questions? Yeah.
Now, the audience, you must be bursting with questions. So, shoot.
I have a question. How many of you are literature students?
So it's interesting because I was at UCLA, and so all the so English departments are closing down.
Yes.
But they had an enrollment of 1,200 students in undergrad freshman year.
In English?
And yes, English department at UCLA. So the idea was that everybody wants to be a writer for Hollywood. So they want to write scripts for Hollywood, and that was the catch.
Oh yeah,
So,
UCLA.
yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I just had another observation. You begin with your height, so 6 feet, short, by 1 inches. So that's how the novel begins. So, and then you have modest proposal. And that's exactly how Bangladesh travels begins. So you have still in your mind, when you have this travel going on and how you observe life.
I'm having trouble with. Carry on. No, let's get again. I didn't really understand because there's a lot.
All right. So basically, so when you introduce your central character as 6 feet, short by 1 inch, that's exactly how Jonathan Swift begins starts. And then you have a chapter called Modest Proposal. So I'm just curious, is that subconsciously done, or deliberate?
Some of it. I'm sure there are subconscious. I know there are subconscious choices because I have subsequently, in the course of doing a reading, I'll notice something. But I wonder, did I think that at the time or not? So I don't know if it's subconscious or not. But no, that was very sort of obvious to me. And there are a lot of these associations. My French translator came over she had a huge number of questions. She's a very good translator, really good. She won a prize for the translation of other books and also my book. She came over with a pile of questions like this. to England and spent a weekend with me going through the questions. She started off, we sat down to work, and she asked a couple of questions from this pile, and then she moved half the pile. And I said, what's going on? She said, well, those were the questions that I wanted to ask you about whether you noticed that there were these references. Because I'm going to translate this text and I have to know whether I need to capture these references. And she said, it's quite clear to me that you did all of these. And and then actually one of the interesting things to finish that story, there are a lot of references to the Old Testament, to the King James's Bible throughout the book. And that's not because, but the King James's Bible is a bedrock of English literature. It's a foundational text. So a lot of English literature refers to it as, not explicitly, but the text of modern English literature is grounded in that. And France doesn't have an equivalent canonical Bible text. So there are lots of phrases like, because the novel goes into it at some point. The argument is that acquiring knowledge is not enough. That there is a region of uncertainty and mystery. And that's what Goebbels the completeness is about, that we will never know. And that's what religion is trying to address. So that's the space in which religion has emerged. And so that's why I draw on religious phrases in the Bible, lots of things. There was a phrase that I skipped over, childhood put away, childhood left behind, put away. That's in a particular translation. That's a tiny little thing, but there are lots of these tiny little things. And it's written in such a way that different people take away different things. If you don't notice it, doesn't matter. But if you do, if your reading is and you do pick up all these references, you have a different reading experience. That's all. I'm not trying to exclude anybody, but I'm just trying to write a book that hits different registers. But yeah, and also a modest proposal, you see, is also about eating. The modest proposal is to eat the children. It's a satire, and it's the title. I use it as the title of a chapter, which is to do with abortion. So everything works. When I write, I draft a paragraph, and I need to make sure that the paragraph does two things. I'm not going to tell you what they are because it doesn't matter. It depends. But I don't like a paragraph doing one thing. It needs to do two things. Because then it becomes richer. Okay. This is how you get more from the same. The sum of the parts is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The writers use other techniques. There are a lot of parallels.
Yeah, that's the Lacanian gestalt.
Yeah, but writers use parallels, and I've got a lot of parallels. A lot of stories where there is a parallel. So Zafar meets his mother. His mother was raped by a Pakistani soldier, and then in another part of the story there is another rape, and it's different. And then you have the narrator. He married down. And Zafar might be marrying up. And so there are a lot of these mirrors and parallel. And people might not even realize that there are these mirrors. But this is something that a lot of writers do. They create these parallel stories or stories that reverberate against each other. And even if the reader doesn't identify that's what's happening, they are affected by it. Because we are, by our nature, and that's why you see it in story after story, all stories. Certain structures, certain motifs, I'm not talking motifs, but certain structures, techniques appear in stories across the world. Yeah, please, yeah.
So this is something I checked out in Goodreads before coming here. So there's one comment here that says, remember how excited you were when you discovered Pynchon? Remember how proud you were when you finished the recognitions, when you first read Ulysses or Moby Dick with understanding? because we've read many of the world's acclaimed works and having, through long years of reading, hammered a receptacle of appreciation together on the anvils of many great books and intoxicating glory days of reads and rereads. This is still one sentence. We, or I at least, often have trouble finding fiction that satisfies. Do you have any comment regarding this?
What are they saying? Are they saying that the book satisfied them or not?
Exactly. It's confusing at first. They are satisfied with the fiction. However, they are comparing it to Moby Dick, Ulysses.
Nah, I don't know how. I don't know how you compare it to. I don't even know. I don't know. I mean, it's nice to hear comparisons. So the biggest compliment I got for this book actually was this year. The compliment was paid last year, but received this year. So last year, a titanic figure in literature died. His name was Frederick Jameson. And anybody who studies literature will know Frederick Jameson. Now, this year, a list was published. A short, very short list. And it was a list that Jameson had written just before he died. But just before he died, he wrote down his list of the greatest novelists, not novels, novelists of the 20th and 21st century. I cried when I saw that my name was on this list of something like just 16 or something, less than 20, and you go on it. And of course, he knew that I'd only written one novel, because in the list, he writes Zia Haider Rahman and then in brackets, the name of the novel. So he's not mistaken me for someone else, and he's not deciding that, and I thought, how do you say great, on the basis of one novel? And I don't think I am. I think he just thought that novel, obviously he just thought that novel was great. And it is, it's funny, I'm now happier about self-promotion than I was then. Now I'm happier about self-promotion, but now it's not really, it doesn't do anything. Maybe that's why, right? Maybe I feel that I am not doing it for any gain. So, but it was it's funny, 10 years after that book came out, I got a compliment that really mattered to me, And no, it's all right. But but I would like to write another novel, and I will, but it's not the priority right now, because the world is in a place of danger, and so these two non-fiction books are addressing that.
Let's move on to what we're doing now.
Oh, okay.
You mentioned that you've got two contracts for...
Yes, two. One contract for 2 books.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yeah, 2. Yeah.
There's one in which Bangladesh
Has a
feature.
It does.
Tell us about that.
About that one, yeah. No, so one book is about... I want to tell the story... This is a book, again, that relates to the very first stuff we were talking about. The conceit, the frame of this book, the conceit, is similar to the letter that James Baldwin wrote to his nephew in a collection called The Fire Next Time. And it was a letter to his nephew. So James Baldwin is for my money, one of the best writers of the 20th century. A titanic figure, beautiful prose. I mean, just to talk about it makes the hairs on my. And he wrote this, and he left America in the 50s, I think, to move to France because of the racism in America. And of course, there's racism in France. But he wrote this letter to his nephew. But it was published, and it wasn't written as a letter to begin with. It was a conceit, meaning everybody can see this, right? And should see this. And this book that I have in mind is either explicitly a letter to the immigrant or migrant in the West especially the immigrant or migrant in the West, who comes from the post-colonies, and it is about the next decade and what's coming, in my view. I think there will be unspeakable horrors in the West. Some would say that they've started. In fact, I would say that they've started if you think of the West not just as Europe, but that parts of the world that are ideologically West. So we saw that, we've seen that, we've witnessed to those horrors for the last 2 years. Okay? And I think those horrors are going to spread into Europe generally. So I wanted to write a book that reaches out to immigrants and migrants and diaspora and talks about this threat and what they need to do, in my view, and how to ready themselves, and critically, how they must not, they will be told that they are not integrated, they are not assimilated. They will be told that they are the authors of what is happening to them. They must not lose sight of who they are. They must recover their roots and their sense of who they are. And because it is critical to their psychic well-being and therefore to their physical well-being. In public, in the outside, yes, go about doing what you need to do in order to work, but in your mind at the very least, and in your practice, you recover your roots. I come back to Bangladesh at year 6 weeks. I have 1.5 hours of Bangla instruction every morning, one-on-one, and I have an hour and a half of homework. And I'm engaged in a project, personal project, to establish better roots in my Bangladeshi identity. I'm from Sylhet. And that's what that book is about. Now, that sounds general, but James Baldwin, his story is read by so many people who aren't black, who understand that letter has a message for them as well, who are to do with something else, and that's what absolutely vital to understand if you think about writing. Don't make things general, do the specific. And I think in Schopenhauer's, you find in literature, you get to the universal through the specific. It never works if you make it. Then it becomes not art or not something of emotion, but it becomes a political script. No, although this is non-fiction, I want to make it very specific. So one of the things that we'll be doing is talking about what has happened in Bangladesh over this past year, because that too is a story of the post-colonies and the turbulence of the post-colonies that is actually connected so much to why we see immigrants in the West and why there is ongoing, there are ongoing numbers of refugees, because everything you see here is a result of this ongoing issue from colonization, not just colonization back then, but colonial activities since then, meddling, all sorts of stuff that's why it's an interesting story. And that's why it's actually an interesting story, I think, for everyone. That's why I find reading James Baldwin fascinating as well, because it has a personal connection, because it is so specific. It's always important. Tell the specific story. Sorry.
Have you started? Doing the research?
Have I started? Yeah, I've actually started writing the other one, because they're in a sequence. There are two, and the other one is the one that I'm writing initially, and as I've been keeping notes, but the other one is the one I've delivered. Yeah, I've written it. But for both, I've delivered as lectures.
The other one is about
the other one is a critique of liberal elites in the West from the perspective of working class progressive. So the other one is about how they just don't get it. How they have, while we are where we are today in the West, which is a rising fascism, not because of these monsters. These monsters are symptoms. The reasons we're in this is the liberal elites have allowed extraordinary unfairness to persist. For 35 years, 50% of Americans have seen no increase in their real incomes. And economic concerns are what matter most to most people. And that's what Mamdani showed. But instead, the liberal elite, they've just been obsessing about cultural stuff because that's cheap. There's no sacrifice that the New York Times has to make, or the Guardian has to make, or the bankers and the lawyers and the doctors, and that top 20%, they don't have to make any sacrifice by insisting on equal rights. In fact, they just widen the pool from which they can hire the top talent. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's all it is. Meanwhile, they do nothing for the economic needs of most Americans. You've got to go away and think, I'm not saying they're controversial, you've got to go away and see that it's astonishing that we haven't talked about the fact that real incomes have been stagnant for so long. And if you don't know what that means, go away and find out. Real incomes just flatlined for 30 to 35 years, in Britain for about 20 years. It is, to progressives, it's not at all surprising where we are today. And it has nothing to do with Trump. It has nothing to do with even Modi. It has nothing to do, these are symptoms. Because if you're not willing to provide economic justice, and you are in fact complicit in denying it, and then on top of that you're not willing to talk about it, then someone will come along and say, vote for me because the foreigners are responsible. It's so easy, it happens over and over again, everywhere. Sorry. Sorry, you see here. One of the things, you write about something you care about, whatever it is. Notice when you get animated. Notice when you're excited about something, right? So,
yeah. I like two things about from today's talk. The first thing was that the true boy thing, that you're writing something which is very autobiographical, but nobody picked on it, nobody definitely could see that is autobiographical, because most people, they have a perception about the author that he can't do that, right? And that's why they didn't pick. Another thing I liked about today's talk, you say the difference between explaining and showing. So
yes.
A lot of people, when they're writing, they do a lot of explaining, and then you ruin it by explaining it. And what is more important to, in fiction, as also I'm a conversationalist. I'm not a literature, I don't do literature. So as a conversationalist, that's I see that yes, you need to do a lot of showing how people do what they do. The last thing. Are you afraid that in Dhaka you will meet only liberal elites?
No, yes, I'm
Sorry.
No, you're right, and you're right that there's a big danger, and so I do I make effort. How much, so for instance, I was very keen to meet, so one thing that puzzles me is what happened to the women from July of last year? Where the hell did they go? So I made inquiries and reached out, and I met and had supper with a young woman who was very involved until August and then withdrew. I heard through various people that she withdrew, and I wanted to know why. And she has a story, and we met, and we spent 3.5 hours. And we only got to July 16th, morning of July 16th. So we're meeting again to carry on. And there are lots of people like this. I talked to, my father was a waiter, my mother was a seamstress. When I go to restaurants, people have noticed, elite especially, that I seem to be able to talk with staff very easily. It's because I don't see any barrier between me and them. Because my first job when I was in school was at the weekends and the vacations, I would wait tables. You know what a waiter is? I don't need to put waiter. So I didn't have, I remember I did a festival when the book novel came out, and I was at staying at a hotel in Calcutta, and at breakfast there were two people, and I later learned she was the daughter of, she was one of the nephews. And I was sitting there and I was talking, and the waiter came and I started talking with him. And I started talking with him about the hotel, and stuff going on in the background in the hotel that I noticed. I forgot about the two people sitting there. But well, I wasn't. I was sitting with them, but only because the table was a big table. And then when he left, and we had jokes, and she said, "That's really weird. I mean, how do you do that? You know, why you?" And I don't think it's a talent. I think it's just my class identity.
Yeah.
Just as if they started talking to someone in elite, I wouldn't say, "Wow, how did you do that?" You know, how did you do that? It's really, they think, "Wow, you're a man of the people." They took you. So I look for, you know, I look for them constantly. Okay. And keep a smile like Mamdani.
Yeah,
right? Mamdani smile, that would be good. I was saying to him, yeah, that's the Mamdani smile. Yeah. Yes, that's right. You've been waiting. I'm so sorry.
Some of my questions are already answered.
Excellent.
But I would like to thank you for visiting us and also for writing the book.
Oh.
Yeah, wonderful. So I wanted to ask, you have been engaging with Global South,
Yes.
Bangladesh, India, and other countries.
Yes, definitely.
So how was the uptake of this book in Global South communities?
Yeah.
Particularly in terms of
In Global South, great question.
and their questions.
Yeah, no, it was very well received in India, very well. You see, that's because when I say it's very well received in India, I'm not saying that India loved the book. I'm saying that the Indian literary elite, it's a very narrow sort of, they really loved the book, and so yeah. And in the Global South elsewhere, I didn't know elsewhere. I mean, it was published, you know, everywhere in the Commonwealth because that's how the rights systems work, the copyright program. In Afghanistan, apparently when it came out, everyone had a copy of the book in the expat NGO circuit. So I say, again, not everyone in Afghanistan, it's a particular, because everybody recognized the Afghan character, the characters based in Afghanistan. The book had just a great reception everywhere. So
That's wonderful.
it's a bit strange actually to that after a certain point you say, well, what's going on? Why is everybody?
Then going back to my original questions, we are talking about global elites and all.
Yeah.
And in many ways, these global elites, the intellectuals, the leaders, they are the largest consumers of Western frameworks, epistemologies, and all. So, in light of this, students, teachers, researchers like us, what can we truly know? Right? Because we are being, in that
when you're part of the target market or when you bring yourself into the sights of this kind of targeting, here's the product, and you can't tell if it, No, I agree. I think you have to. So it's a journey, as they say. I have undertaken a personal journey in the last 2 years. A huge personal journey for a number of reasons, but one reason is Gaza. I grew up in the West. I'm an intellectual. This means I have a lot of Jewish friends, because there are a lot of Jewish intellectuals. Also, I have always felt an affinity with Jewish people in the West, Jewish intellectuals, because they are a little bit an outsider, not everywhere, but they also, the intellectuals I met, they appreciated the outsider more than others. But I also discovered something I didn't realize, that some of these so-called friends, they have this blind spot, this region where suddenly it's the terrain where their own faculties are suspended. They really just can't. And for me that was painful. But also for me, I realized I was so ignorant. I had relied on the fact, I read Tait, I read all sorts of stuff. But I relied on the fact that these Jewish friends of mine are so nice and so important to me. Surely there must be some justice on the Israeli side, right? Because they talk about Israel as well. And then it was Gaza. It was actually asking a couple of questions and then finding that nobody was answering them. I asked on Twitter, I was using Twitter, I used it for a long time. But I asked people, why are they moving people around? I didn't understand this. Does anybody have an explanation? Why are they moving? And I have a lot of followers on Twitter, if they're still there, who are journalists and policy wonks in America. They're from historical reasons. A lot of followers there. People like it. I remember Susan Sontag's son tried to ask a question, he made an effort. And it's something in the nature of maybe it helps them identify Hamas. And he was just sincerely trying. And I said, well, how would that be the case? Hamas don't have uniforms. They could move with the people that are being moved. And he said, you're right, I don't know. And that's actually, it can be a simple thing like that. When I know I have a lot of followers who are journalists, and I'm asking a question that doesn't seem to be at all controversial, and yet nobody either people don't want to answer it or can't answer it. That's happened really. And I discovered, like many people I think have, because the internet is now available, I think many young people have discovered it as well. I discovered that Israel's founding is just a story of, it's a horrific story. And it's documented. I'm not saying, I've discovered that it's not a matter of controversy. It's documented. And I think that's what made so many the world change. Only 8% of Democrat voters support the state of Israel. Things have changed incredibly in America. And I think because of the internet and because the internet has allowed us not just to tell the story of the present, but the internet has recovered history. You understand that's the extraordinary thing.
I'm curious about one thing. You got degrees from some top universities in the world, Oxford, Cambridge, Montgomery University, Yale University. How did you manage to do this?
Oh, because
do that. Like, why did you choose to go to all those Russell Group and Ivy League schools?
they're the ones that give you money. It's true. Wherever, I get a scholarship, so that's why. I mean, that's why I carried on, just because for some reason I couldn't get a scholarship and not pay anything. What's that? Economics. And I wanted, because I was curious, I think if I started at a US liberal arts program, then I probably wouldn't have done a lot of it, because in the liberal arts program I could study lots of different things, but when I went to university in England, you only studied one subject, so that was frustrating for someone who likes to explore lots of things. Anyway.
So, could you just explain what you did? So you took a degree in math at Oxford, and then law.
Well, then a postgraduate degree in what's it called, in maths as well, in Cambridge.
So
Yeah.
first degree,
Yeah.
and then Cambridge.
Yeah, so this is the one.
Graduate degree in math from Cambridge, and then.
Oh no, actually, no. So I went to a German academic foundation for Cambridge. I had a scholarship to a German academic foundation for gifted students. So in Bavaria, Heisenberg went there. Heisenberg, the uncertainty principle. But you know, people are fascinated by. They want to know the details of the education in Bangladesh. Elsewhere, elsewhere I don't even say why. When I wrote for a piece for the Business Standard, and they asked me, "Can you send us information about your bio? You know, can you send us bios?" I wrote, "Hey, Zia Haider Rahman is a writer." That was it. And then they said, no, we have to do more. And then I said, oh, okay, actually, I'm writing a piece about asset tracking, because I did a little bit of that, and this is the piece about it, and so I said, Zia Haider Rahman is a former anti-corruption and writer. Is a writer and former anti-corruption. They said, no. And then they went online, and half an hour later, they said, how about this? And exactly. Actually, that one's even longer than that. Yeah. And I go, hang on, this is a newspaper. Where are you going to put this? And then you put this and then they put it bang in the middle of the front page. Big box. My bio. Almost as if it's a story. And it happened once in Australia. I was doing an interview for ABC with Michael Carter. Yeah. So on the Books and Arts program, it's a great interview. You should because I start talking about Israeli, Australian immigration policy and what's happening in Nauru and this sort of stuff. And but he asked me at one point. He starts talking about my education as well. And I'm very uncomfortable. Then eventually I say to him, you know, I'm uncomfortable about my education because I have been used by the right wing many times to demonstrate that if you really want to succeed, you can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And I am not that person. I am a product of circumstance. One circumstance is I was gifted, but I didn't choose that. Another circumstance was that I was in a country where my gifts something could happen with them. I didn't earn these things. These are not earned, and so anyway. So I mean, it's impressive, but it's really not that impressive.
So, and then where did you study law?
Where or when? Well, I actually went banking first.
And then law.
And then law, because it's just the
law at.
I did a bit there, but no, at what's it called? The Inns Court School of Law in London, and in London. I was a barrister, not an American. I was a barrister. So
barrister. In Bangladesh, people use it as a kind of like
a stick.
This is barrister so and so.
That's very I didn't. I mean, one of the things that. So I'm giving a talk. I think in 2014 I gave a talk in which I said that people and to focus less on the authority and the noting, and more on the content of what someone says. And so often things are dismissed because of who said it, rather than what they said.
I did have a question. So you say that the South Asian authors, they have this tendency to cater to the Western audience.
Yeah.
So is it only through over-explaining, or could you say that there are other ways that they do it?
There are other ways they do it.
And what would it be then? How does your book differentiate from those?
Don't be self-conscious. You know, do writing for reasons not. So many of these people who write want to publish. I was writing from adolescence. I don't know if this is the prescription for everybody, but my habit was formed in circumstances in which I wasn't thinking about publication at all. I published a short story in college, but other than that, I wasn't very interested. I love the process. I love making beautiful things. I do carpentry and I make objects and and I like making beautiful things. I don't think, I must show this to the world. Why that's relevant though is that the self-consciousness is devastating, even for good writing. So forget about pandering or all of that. It's this. You don't want to be self-conscious. Do you understand what I mean by self-conscious? When you read something really good, are you aware that you're reading?
I am, yes.
No, you're not. Then you're not. No, think about it. If you're immersed in a text, are you also constantly aware that you're reading?
So what I'm writing or?
No, reading. When you're reading a really good novel, do you forget that you're reading? Can anybody
No, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I do understand the question, but then again,
It's a question.
It's becoming very strange as a reader or maybe as a student.
I do imagine myself in the situation.
Here's a book, you're reading a great book. Imagine. Are you aware of the story or are you aware that you're reading? Aware. You're conscious. Yeah, you're in the story, right? The same when you're writing. You should be getting into the position where you're not aware that you're writing. And if you're not aware that you're writing, you're not aware as a reader.
That you focus on the writing, not on you writing.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah?
So then about like the elements that the South Asian authors use to cater to the Western audience. So what are the techniques?
I don't really understand. I can't hear you.
So you say your over-explaining is one of the ways that South Asian authors, the writers have the tendency to cater to the Western audience.
Yeah.
But is it only over-explaining or?
No, there are lots of other ways, but what I've told you is the solution to everything.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I didn't make that clear. If you lose self-consciousness, because all of those problems, this particular problem of catering to someone, are problems of being self-conscious. And then being self-conscious of how you're being viewed by a specific group. But initially it's the self-consciousness, right?
So then again, I'd like to derive Pastor's point. He said that people who write on post-colonial texts, or we do have to explain a bit, or the authors do have to explain a bit. Otherwise, what we are trying to portray that isn't going to reach the Western readers.
Yeah, if you do that at the creative, you're then already given up the creative. You can do it afterwards. Just write without self-consciousness. Just write, and then afterwards you can workshop it or test whether your audience can understand what's going on. But that's That's a business decision.
You write what you want to write, and then when you're looking for a publisher, then you say, would be interested in publishing it. Would be interested.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Basically, you don't think about an audience when you write.
You're not. You might have an idea of a reader, so I will have an idea of a reader because I'm thinking about attributes like how much, how smart are they, how much have they read, or do they, I might have some sense of that. I write. I started in adolescence. The reason I care about writing and the reason it was important in the private space is that for me, I had a fantasy that I would find when I was a child. I had a genuine fantasy, a literal fantasy, that there was a paragraph, a magic paragraph, a form of words like abracadabra or open sesame, longer, it had to be longer, these are the words. A paragraph that I could say to my parents, and then we would be able to talk. Because I have a huge gulf, there's a huge gulf between me and my parents. From childhood. And so for me, language, it wasn't really so much my story. My interest, writers, there are two kinds. There are writers who are interested in story, and there are writers who are interested in language. And I'm interested in language and communication. And the miracle and failure of communication. And so, well, I don't know why I said this to you, yeah. So yeah, well, this practice of losing yourself is, for me, it's a very personal basis. And if you can tap into that, then you'll start making art. But otherwise, you're just, doing business. Whatever it is, whatever is important, that genuine, some sincere motive to write. But if you find that really the only thing you want is glory in this way, it won't work. You understand what I'm saying? You need to know yourself, you need to explore yourself. Anyway. Okay, yeah, sorry.
We could go on forever. Thank you, Leah, for making time for us here.
No.
Big round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, this is why I did it. This is why I did it. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm gonna guess that this is it's a football. Yeah. Wow, this is amazing. Even press. Shall I open it? Yeah, I'll open it. I think everybody else is curious. It's not fair to, it's like a writer, you do a cliffhanger. Oh my goodness. Oh wow. Oh look, that's just, look at that. Blowing in the Wind, Shamsat Mortuza is gone. Memoirs of Dhaka University, Pariah and other poets. You really have a very talented poet. You know that, right? You really do. You shared another collection with me. I was reading it in Tonga, and it was just so amazing. And then finally, the late Syed Manzur Islam's library was fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks.